Hello and welcome to this video on how to do the quick calibration procedure in the Motoklik app, which will guarantee millimeter position accuracy for the rear suspension on your bike. Now, why would you need to do this? So the Motoklik app does come with default settings for the different makes and models that we support. However, we found that the millimeter value can vary slightly for some of the different models by a few millimeters. And this doesn't really help when it comes to the sag value and so on. It is useful for looking at the overall performance of the suspension and having an insight as to what the suspension is doing around the circuit. But if you really want that millimeter accuracy, you'll have to follow this quick calibration procedure. In order to do it, you will need some tools. So you'll need a strap here to hold the rear swing arm in position. You'll need your measuring tape to measure the sag values at a few different points. You need your tool to take the saddle off to get access to the battery, and then you'll also need your tools to remove the rear axle and remove one bolt from the swing arm, which will allow the swing arm to move through the full stroke. So you will also need the Motoklik supplied power supply cable, which will allow you to connect the Motoklik connector directly to the battery in your bike. And it's very, very important that you follow the correct procedure for connecting this cable, because if the terminals are reversed, you could run the risk of at least blowing a fuse, but also damaging your ECU. So be sure to follow these instructions exactly when it comes to using this power supply cable during the procedure. So let's get started. Okay, so with the saddle removed, we now have access to the Motoklik power supply cable. So what we want to do is to release the power supply cable from the OBD connector on the bike, and then we have a vision of the terminals inside in this connector. So what we want to do next is take our Motoklik connector power supply cable here. So this is the one I'm talking about. These terminals here will be used to connect it to the battery, and these terminals here will be used to connect it to this plug connector. So when connecting these terminals to the plug connector, it's very, very important to make sure you're connecting each one to the correct terminal. As you will see, one of the cables has a completely black coating, and the other cable has these white lines intersecting the outside cover of the cable. The one with the white lines is the positive terminal, and the ones with the completely black cover is the negative terminal. And then we can easily identify the positive terminal here on this power supply connector, because it is the one that has the fuse on it. So this means that this terminal here needs to be connected to the terminal that has the white lines on the outside. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm making sure I'm connecting it to the right one. I'll just slide it in like this, and now it's in place. So now we can see that we've attached the positive terminal to the correct position in the connector here. So again, this is the positive cable with the fuse on it. We follow that wire back into the back of the plug, and then we can see, okay, this is the positive terminal that I need to connect the positive wire to, and then we can just plug in the negative onto the other side. So we just slide that terminal in place. So now that's that side connected. The next step will be to connect these terminals here onto the battery underneath the saddle also. So again, the one with the red side is for the positive terminal, and the one with the blue side is for the negative terminal on the battery. So we're going to start by connecting the negative terminal first. So we'll just lift this cover here, and then we will take our tool and just release this bolt a little bit so that we can slide the terminal in underneath. Okay, and then just slide that in there like that, and then just give it a little pinch just to keep it in place during this procedure. And then we do the same for the positive side. So I'll just release this bolt a little bit. It's a good idea to also wear safety glasses while doing this procedure in case there's any issue with the battery when you connect it. So we just connect that terminal on there, And again, we just pinch it into position with the bolt to keep it in place during the procedure. Okay, so now everything is connected here underneath the saddle the way it should be in order to carry out this procedure, and we just want to wait for the satellite position lock on the handlebar controller before we can continue. With the power supply cable connected and we have the GPS fix, which we can recognize by the flashing green on the handlebar controller, we can now start to do the quick calibration procedure. So what you want to do is to open the Motoklik app. At the top of the screen we go to select a bike, and then we pick quick calibration from the menu. And here we can see then what the quick calibration page looks like. So at the top of the screen we can give the configuration a name. So what I'm going to do is call this one Motoklik FC350. And in the next part what we need to do is measure the millimeter position of the rear axle when the suspension is fully extended. So in order to do that, we'll take our measuring tape and then we'll measure the sag here at full extension. So I'll place the measuring tape in the center of the axle, and on the Husqvarna then there's a little marker on the mudguard, and as I look at it here, this says 636 millimeters. So what I will do next is I will go back to the app, and then we just type in that full extension value of 636 and then press add data point. So this is the very start of the calibration procedure then, and in the next part what we'll do is we will fill in the millimeter values all the way down along here at a few different positions. So in order to do that, what we'll have to do is remove the back wheel just to make things a little bit easier, and then there's also one bolt in the top of the linkage that goes through the swing arm. If we release that, that will allow the swing arm to move through the complete stroke. So let's do that next. Okay, so with the rear wheel removed and that bolt removed, we now have the ability to move the swing arm through the full stroke very easily. I've put the back axle back in position here because we want to keep using it to measure the sag value. So all I've done is just slid the axles through and then hand tightened the nut on here, and I've made sure it's pushed back up against the stops here in the axle to make sure we're measuring from the same position. So the next step will be to wrap a strap around the swing arm here up to the mudguard, and then we'll hold the swing arm up in the fully compressed position. Okay, so now with the suspension in the fully compressed position, we'll measure our sag value again here, and then we'll input that into the mobile app and press add data point, and it will read the value off and store that value for us. So here, at full compression, I'm reading 309 millimeters. So what I will do is I will open the app. In the first text box, I will put in 309. Then I press read sensor value. It inputs the value of the suspension sensor at that position, and then I press add data point. And this gives me a new row now where I can input the different values at all the different points in the stroke. So that's exactly what I'll do. I'll keep dropping this swing arm down maybe 11 or 12 times throughout the stroke until we get to the full extension point again, and then we'll be able to finish the quick calibration procedure. So each time I let this off, I let it off maybe 20 or 30 millimeters and then work my way down. So I've dropped the suspension down here now slightly, and I've input the millimeter value again in the second position. So it's the same procedure. You write in the value, press read sensor value, and then add data point. And you do that at each step throughout this process. So I've measured the suspension now at 11 different points throughout the stroke, and what's very important is when you measure the last one here to make sure the suspension is extended a little bit further than the value we measured at full extension. So if you remember, when the wheel and everything was in position, I measured the full extension position to be 636 millimeters. The swing arm is now in a position that's 646 millimeters deep, so it's 10 millimeters further than the extension value. And it's very important to do that at the end of the calibration procedure to make sure that the suspension is extended slightly more than the value that was measured when the wheel and everything was in position. You don't want it to be any more than 10 millimeters, and you don't want it to be any less than maybe 3 or 4 millimeters in difference. So just make sure to do that at the end of the position. And then once we have put in all of these different 11 values from the different parts, we press the finish button, and now it is complete. The calibration is done on this motorcycle, and we won't have to calibrate it again into the future. So if you change out the shock, provided the shock isn't a different length, you can try different settings and everything without having to recalibrate the system each time. So all that's left to do now is to put the wheel back on, put the bolt back in, and remove the power supply cable, and then we're ready to go riding. When removing the power supply cable, it's important to remove the positive terminal from the battery first, which means that there's no energy being sent into the system and there's no risk of a spark or shorting out or anything. So we'll start off by doing that. So we just undo this bolt and then we will tighten it up. Just make sure our terminals are in the correct position, and then we will remove the negative terminal from the battery. So now our system is safe again. There's no risk of a short circuit or anything now that the positive terminal has been removed. And then we can just pull our terminals back out of our plug connector here. So now we're finished with this cable. And then we can just plug this terminal back in and put our connector back in position underneath the ECU here. Make sure our terminals are tight on the battery and put the rubber covers back in place. And now we're ready to put the saddle back on, and the bike will be back ready for the track. So our calibration procedure is now complete. We've put the back wheel back in place, we've put that bolt back into the swing arm, made sure that everything is tight. We've removed the power supply cable, so make sure to follow that procedure exactly as we've done it, and we've put our seat back in place. So now we're ready to go onto the track. We've tried to make this as easy as possible to do through the app, but if you have had any issues, then feel free to use the contact us form on our website or put a comment below the video and we'll try and get back to you with information that can help. We've tried to keep as much information in our product information page on the website, so if you have any more information that you need, again, you can contact us, let us know what's needed, what we can help out with, and we'll try our very best to do that. Thank you for watching.